The story I'm about to tell has been labeled Indiana's worst crime, and it's not hard to see why. Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Francesca, and this is where I tell you guys a new true crime story that I've learned. If you love true crime like me, then I recommend you subscribe because I'm here for you every week with a new true crime story. Lester and Betty Likens had two daughters, Sylvia Likens, who was 16, and they also had another daughter, Jetty Likens, who was 15. They were two really happy girls. They were described to like skating, singing, hanging out with friends, and they would even help with some small income by babysitting. They did this because their family, unfortunately, was financially struggling in Indianapolis where they lived. And in the summer of 1965, they found jobs as fair concessionaires. So basically they would work at the concession stands at fairs, but this would also mean that they'd have to constantly be moving. They were desperate for the money, but they still also had two underage girls. And in this small neighborhood, they had a neighbor named, I'm gonna butcher this name, it's Gertrude Bennis Swisky. She was an older woman at the time. She had been recently divorced and she had 7 children. They varied from the ages of 17 years old to 18 months old. So the two had become acquainted when Sylvia became friends with one of Gertrude's daughters in school, and they had offered Gertrude to take the girls, Sylvia and Jenny, for $20 a week. She became the caregiver for the girls alongside her 7 other children. So the couple had left for work and were expected to be gone for months. Mind you, this is the summer, so the girls do not have school. Everything seemed okay in the beginning. The girls were living in the house. I'm sure it was very cramped and it was very uncomfortable and they were definitely homesick, but they were still helping out with house chores and they even attended Sunday church with the family. So everything seemed to be okay. The arrangement was working well. Gertrude was getting her money still at this time. Then as time went on, the parents were not paying Gertrude the amount that they promised her, which was $20 for the week, and it slowly started to get less and less. Because of this, what seemed like a great arrangement turned out to be a nightmare. Gertrude began to take out the anger she had for the parents on the girls. She would find any excuse to punish the girls. So it went from eating too much food to having no reason at all. It began with weekly beatings. She would beat them across the butt. And then slowly it began to increase to 12 beatings per week. Something started boiling up in Gertrude and she started taking out all her anger on Sylvia alone. Slowly the punishments got even worse for Sylvia. She would starve her, or she would make her start eating spoiled food from the trash. At one point, Sylvia had a boyfriend and Gertrude started spreading that Sylvia was pregnant. So to teach Sylvia a lesson on the birds and the bees, she decided to tell Sylvia that if she did anything with a boy, that she would end up pregnant. And then she decided to kick Sylvia in her genitals, in her private area. As this continued to progress, Gertrude became not the only one abusing Sylvia anymore. Gertrude's oldest daughter, Paula, who was 17, began also participating in these beatings and abuse. She would do things like knock Sylvia off her chair and say that she didn't fit on it. Paula even invited the neighborhood kids to help abuse Sylvia. So one day, Paula and one of the neighborhood kids had forced Sylvia to eat this hot dog with a bunch of mustard and spices on it. And then eventually Sylvia threw it up and then they forced her to eat it again. After the summer ended, the kids would go back to school and Sylvia had come up with a rumor. I don't know if she did this or not, but I think this was Sylvia's way of getting back at Gertrude in her own 16-year-old way. Apparently, Sylvia had started a rumor that Gertrude and her daughter Stephanie were both sex workers, and the rumor eventually makes it back to Stephanie, who, with her boyfriend, confronts Sylvia and then end up beating her all the way to where she could not stand. They bash her head into the wall and they flip her on the ground and leave her. Sylvia at this point was on the ground, beat. I'm sure it took her a long time to recover that day and then head back home to where she got another beating from Gertrude. This is where Paula also joins in. So Gertrude and Paula are both abusing Sylvia at the house to the point where Paula slapped Sylvia and broke her wrist. And then just when you thought the story could not get any more graphic, we're only halfway done. I guess for Gertrude, having her kids help her beat Sylvia was not enough, and she decided to invite the neighborhood kids to help in Sylvia's abuse. The kids would all come in groups and they would assault Sylvia. These are really graphic, so if you want to skip or exit, now would be the time to do so. The kids would come and they would beat her, and they would even put out their cigarettes on her. At one point, Gertrude had stripped Sylvia in front of everyone, and she had forced a Pepsi bottle inside of Sylvia. She wanted to prove to her sister Jenny just the kind of girl that Sylvia was. As school continued for the kids, Gertrude refused to buy Sylvia anything that she needed for school, and Sylvia needed a gym suit for gym class. She wasn't able to get it from Gertrude, so she stole it. And when she confessed to stealing a gym suit, Gertrude had beat her and refused to let her go back to school. So at this point, Sylvia was in the house, leaving Gertrude to do what she wanted to. She kept forcing the idea that Sylvia was pregnant or she was fooling around with boys. And so to punish her for this, she decided to burn all of her fingertips with the match. At one point, Jenny and Sylvia met one of their sisters, Diana, who was 18 at the time, at a park. And Sylvia had told Diana that she was hungry, so Diana had given her a sandwich. At the park was also Gertrude's smaller daughter, who was 11, Marie, and she had reported back to Gertrude that Sylvia had taken the sandwich from Diana. Gertrude had called Sylvia gluttonous, and she began to choke and beat her. Paula also participated in this. After that, Gertrude and Paula take Sylvia for a scalding bath to cleanse her, and Sylvia ended up fainting, and Gertrude would grab her hair and bang her against the bathtub to bring her back. After this happened, a few weeks later, Sylvia and Jenny both see their sister again at the same park, and they began to tell her about the abuse that they've been enduring with Gertrude. At first, Diana did not believe them, thinking that they're exaggerating, maybe they're little girls, which they're not that little, but I don't know why they would lie about that. But anyways, she thought they were exaggerating, and she went and found where they were staying, and Gertrude ordered her off the property and began saying that she could not come back and that she had permission from the parents to take care of the girls. Due to all the abuse that Sylvia had on her body, she began to lose control of her bladder and her need to go to the bathroom, and Gertrude would not let her go to the bathroom. So eventually she would go on herself, and Gertrude would then punish her even more. Because of this, Gertrude tied Sylvia up and threw her in the basement, kept Sylvia with no clothes on, she didn't give her any food, and she gave her barely any water. Gertrude would tell her other kids that Sylvia had said something about them in order to get them angry at Sylvia and with the hopes of them attacking her. So with Sylvia tied up, Gertrude invited the neighborhood kids to pour salt onto Sylvia's wounds and even smeared urine and other things onto Sylvia's face. They taunted her with food, they taunted her with sleeping on the bed, they taunted her with water. They would promise these things and then they would never follow through. One night, Gertrude had called Sylvia upstairs, and because of the way that Gertrude was portraying Sylvia to be this girl who sleeps around, she's told Sylvia, "You branded my daughters, so I'm gonna brand you." She took a heated needle and began carving into Sylvia's skin. When she could not finish it, she called one of the neighborhood kids to come over and finish the job. And on her stomach, it read, "I'm a prostitute and I'm proud of it." So after Sylvia had this on her stomach, Gertrude wanted to show everyone like she was proud of it. And she told the neighborhood kids that Sylvia had gotten it at this sex party that she was at last night. That same night, Sylvia told her sister Jenny that she thought she was dying. She felt it. And the next day, Gertrude forced Sylvia to write a letter to her parents saying that she had relationships with multiple kids in the neighborhood and that she ran away. Her plan with having Sylvia write the letter was that she wanted her sons to take Sylvia into the woods and just abandon her because she knew she was gonna die. Sylvia knew what was happening and she screamed for help. She began hitting the walls in the basement, and the neighbor next door did hear it at 3 in the morning, but I guess didn't assume anything, and so they just left it. The day after, Sylvia was no longer able to control her bathroom needs. She ended up going to the bathroom on herself, and Gertrude's son hosed her down. Sylvia had one last attempt at escaping the basement, and she began crawling up the stairs. Gertrude stomped on Sylvia's head in order to stop her and then left Sylvia unconscious. After this, Gertrude's children gave Sylvia a soapy bath. They cleaned her up, they made her look nice, and they put some new clothes on her. She was basically skin and bones at that point, and she just lay in her bed and she wished that she had her parents there with her and that she wanted to be taken back home. Sylvia ended up passing away that night. She had 150 wounds on her body. She had a subdural hematoma from a severe blow to her temple, and she had shock from burns, and she was very malnourished. When Sylvia ends up passing away, Gertrude's daughter Stephanie starts to perform CPR on her, and when Sylvia wouldn't wake up, she kept yelling at her that she was faking it. When it's clear that Sylvia's not waking up, Gertrude goes outside, finds a payphone, and calls the police. When the police arrive at Gertrude's house, they see that Sylvia's in a terrible, terrible condition. She's emaciated. She has urine, feces all around her. She has terrible wounds across her body. She has burns, and Gertrude ends up giving the police all these lies, all these excuses, and Sylvia's sister Jenny tells the police, if you help get me out of here, I'm going to tell you everything that happened. Jenny gives her statement to the police, tells them everything that her sister endured, and they end up arresting Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and her other son, Gertrude's other sons, as well as 5 of the neighborhood children, who these ages ranged from 11 to 17 to 18. So it's crazy how young these kids were and the abuse that they put onto Sylvia. In court, Gertrude completely shifted all the blame onto her daughters, onto her oldest daughter, Paula, and one of the neighborhood kids, whose name was Coy Hubbard. She ended up pleading not guilty on the reason of insanity. She was ultimately sentenced to a life in prison and guilty of first-degree murder. When Paula confesses, she has no remorse at all for what she's done. She actually ends up trying to escape prison twice. She was guilty of second-degree murder, and she was also given life in prison. Stephanie, Gertrude's other daughter, had given her testimony in court, but was found not guilty, which I don't know what happened there. The 3 main kids in the neighborhood, one of them being Coy Hubbard, were all given 2 to 21 years in prison, and they all received parole after 18 months, unfortunately. The other kids in the neighborhood that were brought in and arrested, they were brought in, but then they were released because they were witnesses to the trial. And Gertrude's youngest kids, they were put into foster care homes. I can't even imagine what the parents did when they found out that Sylvia was held captive and abused for the amount of time that they were gone. She was in Gertrude's house for only 3 months, and she passed away. I'm glad Gertrude got life in prison, and she's passed now, but I can't even imagine what the family went through after finding out what happened to Sylvia, especially the parents. They were gone for so long. I'm sure they had no idea what was happening. They leave their kids in what they think is a trusted environment, and it turns out to be the worst nightmare ever. I'm sure Jenny has also a lot of resentment for her parents and also for not being able to do anything for her sister. Eventually she did help get justice for her sister by giving her statements to the police. There is an organization, Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center, that's been around for 15 years, and they do work based on this case for child abuse, and they have the whole story there as well if you want to reread it. This was a tough case. It was very brutal, graphic, and I can't even imagine what she went through in her 3 months staying at that house. I hope you guys liked this story, and I hope to see you in the next one.